Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is criminal defense attorney Lauren Johnson-Norris. Lauren, thanks so much for joining me.
I'm glad to be here.
Last week, former FBI Director James Comey was indicted on charges of making a false statement to Congress and obstructing a congressional proceeding. This is based on his testimony from 5 years ago before the Senate Judiciary Committee. So to start off the conversation, can you break down those charges for us? What exactly does this indictment mean?
So this indictment claims that Comey made false statements in 2020 and that he also sought to obstruct when he made those statements. So they brought forward 2 charges against him. Now, what he's alleged to have said that was false and that obstructing effort referred back to his statement from 2017. So it's a complicated case and a set of charges.
There is a lot to unpack regarding that statement that is central to the DOJ charges here, because it talks about something that Comey said in 2017. This was said in 2020, and the indictment was last week. So let's talk about that. I want to read it verbatim just so we get the full context here. This is the tense back and forth between Senator Ted Cruz and former FBI Director James Comey. This is what Senator Cruz said to Comey, quote, "On May 3rd, 2017, in this committee, Chairman Grassley asked you point blank, quote, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation? You responded under oath, quote, never. He then asked you, quote, have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton administration? You responded again under oath, no. Now, as you know, Mr. McCabe, who works for you, has publicly and repeatedly stated that he leaked information to the Wall Street Journal and that you were directly aware of it and that you directly authorized it. Now, what Mr. McCabe is saying and what you testified to this committee cannot both be true. One or the other is false. Who's telling the truth? And this is how Comey answered. He said this, quote, I can only speak to my testimony. I stand by the testimony you summarized that I gave in May of 2017. So essentially what Comey is saying under oath is that he never authorized anyone, including himself, to leak anything to the press. The indictment then says this, quote, the statement was false because, as James B. Comey Jr. then and there knew, he in fact had authorized Person 3 to serve as an anonymous source in news reports regarding an FBI investigation concerning Person 1. I would love your thoughts here, because this is talking about a statement in 2017, then to 2020, and now to last week. I know that was a mouthful, even for me. So what are your thoughts on what the indictment says?
So at the outset, Comey has always denied authorizing any leak. Back in 2018, the Office of Inspector General did its own investigation, and at which time Andrew McCabe suggested that Comey knew about the disclosure, but also sort of after the fact, and that Comey said something to the effect of, sure. So the issue is that Comey at the time in 2018 denied that, and the Office of Inspector General gave the overwhelming weight of evidence to Comey's account. So now the Department of Justice is saying that it's crediting McCabe as opposed to Comey, and saying it's a false statement on Comey's part to deny the authorization.
So essentially is what you're saying, this is a he said, a McCabe versus Comey. And normally, how strong are those cases?
This is very difficult to prove. Anytime we have just evidence that deals with what people said, and then what people said, we're talking now 7 years ago, or 5 years ago in reference to 7 years ago, it only becomes more and more convoluted. Then when you deal with the fact that you have to prove intent, the government has to prove intent, that Comey intended to obstruct, that he intended to provide false information, this just becomes even more and more difficult to prove.
And before this indictment, there were reports that people, including Attorney General Pam Bondi, had concerns about the strength of this case. And she said that that reporting is flat out a lie, but the indictment's only about a page and a half. What does that indicate to you? Is that normal, or does that say perhaps this case is more on the flimsy side?
Well, we do know that this is a controversial case because there were years of political pressure on the Department of Justice by the president to charge Comey, and that this case was filed immediately after changing the leadership at the United States Attorney's Office in Virginia. And many people are saying that that's political. That timing, paired with the fact that Comey was previously cleared and sort of the lack of substance in the indictment, does suggest that this is political in nature and a selective prosecution issue.
I know many critics are viewing the indictment of former FBI Director James Comey as political, as President Trump enacting retaliation against Comey. But as a lawyer, what do you think the indictment of Comey means for the future of the DOJ?
I mean, this is really difficult. This is really disturbing and unprecedented to see President influence so much pressure on its Department of Justice to go after who he's described as enemies. He did not have a special prosecutor bring forward these charges. In fact, he's the prosecutor. And so the sort of direct line of prosecution is a concern. It does gives a negative look to the Department of Justice. And I think that Comey will come into court. He will argue that this is selective prosecution set in this political backdrop. And I think it really only makes the prosecution's case more flimsy for that reason, because as Americans, we want our prosecutors to be separate from politics. We want evidence to stand on its own, and we want to know that justice is brought for everyone fairly. So all of this is really troublesome, and you'll see other legal experts echo that as well.
We are really at the beginning of the legal journey here, and we know that the bar is really different to get indicted by a grand jury versus to get convicted. So what hill do prosecutors need to climb? How big is that hill really to get a guilty verdict?
Well, yes, they must prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest standard, as opposed to the indictment, which is really the lowest standard in criminal justice. The government's evidence, its strongest evidence, will be internal FBI records and testimony from former officials like Andrew McCabe, suggesting that Comey knew or approved this disclosure. But we've got, on the other side, the overwhelming weight of evidence by the Office of Inspector General crediting Comey's account. And so this already is a tough hurdle for prosecutors to be able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. I just would be incredibly surprised if they succeeded in that regard.
I am curious how serious these charges are, though. Charges of making a false statement to Congress and obstructing a congressional proceeding. I mean, what is the weight of that?
I think that while the penalties are not the most serious penalties that we see in the justice system, for someone like James Comey, who dedicated his entire career to advocating and being at the forefront of justice in America, this is just about as offensive as it can get. And so to suggest that he lied and that he sought to obstruct is really serious. Obviously, it is devastating to his reputation and his legacy.
And I know that you've said that it doesn't seem like prosecution has much evidence. This seems like a flimsy case. What do you think that this says about President Trump's DOJ? I mean, what precedent is this setting? What can we expect in the future? Can you expect, as an attorney, more types of retaliation? Because that is how a lot of people are viewing this.
Well, I think the precedent here is that the administration is willing to charge opponents, is willing to charge perceived opponents, and is willing to use the full force of the law against opponents. But we have seen this in other forums. We've seen it civilly. We've seen it now in the criminal justice system. And so I think it's incredibly alarming to folks who work in criminal justice. And it's incredibly concerning for this democracy.
I want to talk about Comey's reaction. He reacted to the indictment saying this, that his heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system. And I'm innocent, so let's have a trial. He's saying he's innocent. He's expected to plead not guilty here, and he's going to be arraigned later in October. So as an attorney, what do you think that we should be looking out for next?
Well, I think we will see the hearings in real time. and see that our judiciary is really the last sort of protection of all of our rights, not just James Comey, but anyone who could be charged under this administration in what is apparently a politicized selective prosecution. And we have to look to that federal judiciary to provide those protections for all of our rights.
Well, there's certainly a lot to look out for in this case. It's just the beginning. And Lauren, as we see it develop, I hope you can come back on and break it down with me. Lauren Johnson-Norris, thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much for having me.